that was a lengthy digression into infixes. They don't play a large role in English grammar, but they are fun. So I thought we'd talk about them. Okay, types of morphemes. So one way of dividing up morphemes is between the free morphemes. These are ones that can exist as independent words, even if they might be in a larger complex construction. So dog is a free morpheme, even if it's in a larger word like doghouse or, you know, dogged or whatever it might be. Leash is a free morpheme because it can exist as a word, even if it's in a word like unleashed, something like that. And then you have bound morphemes. So these are morphemes that cannot stand alone as now it is free, yes. Bound morphemes can't stand on their own. They need to be attached to something else. So affixes are always bound morphemes. Some roots of words are free, some are bound. So dur, like endure, durable, you know, that root doesn't exist. Kempt, right? Unkempt is a word, but kempt is not. Right? Etymologically, sometimes a root might historically have been a word, but it sort of disappears from common usage. You know, that way, and so you have that. Empt, like preempt, exempt, things like that. Okay. Kempt is not a standard word. Now, people jokingly use it as a back formation. It comes historically as a sort of reduction and alteration of combed. So if you're unkempt, you're literally uncombed, right? But yeah, people mostly use it these days. They use kempt as a joking opposite by taking it off. Same thing with ept, right? Instead of saying, you know, like inept, ept. Mit is a Latin root that basically means send. We'll talk about it a little more, a bit brev, like brevity, you know, things like that. So these are all examples of roots that can't stand on their own. They're bound morphemes. Now, one thing, remember, when we're talking about morphemes, we can't just look at the written form. We have to think about the sounds as well. One of the things that, let me see, take a look at what we've been calling plural S. How is that pronounced in those three examples? Yes, we're in an ament zone now. So you say, Tuffy, you say cats? You say Z for cats? Yep. S does sound like S. Z for the first one, S for the second one, Uz for the third one, right? Except it does, yeah. It's very hard. Notice how hard it is to say cats. It's not an accent thing. Cats and dogs I bet you don't. Make a recording of yourself. Hey, Davey, how's it going? Make a recording of yourself. Or actually, here's a way you can tell right away. If you put your finger right here on your throat, near your vocal folds, you can feel when they're vibrating and when they're silent, right? So, for example, compare the beginning of a word when you say pot and bought, right? You want to, what you're trying to feel is when the vibration starts. Pot, bought. What you should notice is the onset of that vibration is much later with pot than it is with a bought. With a bought, you should be starting the vibration even before you open your lips, right? That's what we call a voiced consonant. With the P sound, that's what's called an unvoiced consonant, because you release your lips before you start the voicing, right? So now if you try it with dogs, the G sound is G, you should feel the vibration, it's voiced, and the Z is also voiced, it's consistent, right? Cat, T is unvoiced. Notice by the time you hit the T, the vibration has stopped, and it stays stopped. Cats, right? You should not feel the vibration for it. And that's exactly right, Bins. The G is in cahoots with Z. This variation, so what we have is three forms of this plural pronoun. The question is it three different morphemes? And the answer is no. We consider it to be one morpheme. And the reason why we consider it to be one morpheme is it's three variations of the same form, and we can predict which variant will appear by the surrounding context. In other words, if there is a voiced sound immediately, like a voiced stop, or is immediately before the plural marker, we voice the plural marker. If it's an unvoiced sound, then we devoice the plural marker. So Z for G or B or D, right? Or vowels, T, K, P, right, are going to be unvoiced sounds, right, followed by an S. And then S itself, right, instead of saying horse, right, we add a schwa, an unstressed vowel in between and do the Z because the schwa itself is a vowel. So horses. So these predictable variations are what we call allomorphy. These are other shapes. The morph root means shape, allo, other. So, so these are variant shapes that all go back to the same basic morpheme. So the morpheme is sort of the core abstract group, and the allomorphs are the specific variant forms that appear, right? So good question, Santolo. Those plurals are those are borrowed plurals, right? From, so the us e ending is borrowed from Latin. Some people object to using it for octopus because octopus is actually a Greek word, although we did borrow it through the intermediary of Latin. But there's a few old pedants who suggest that what we ought to say is not octopi or octopuses, but octopodes. I don't recommend that. The S in dogs vibrates the same. You say dogs? Grapadia. Yeah. Hey, so how's it going? You moved the O. Yeah. Octopodians. I've never heard that one, but I mean, my opinion is if you want to say octopuses, you should say octopuses, because once a word is borrowed into English, it's perfectly fine to use the English plural forming resources that the language provides, right? You're not bound to inflect the way the donor language did for all time. Now, another instance of octopuses, because it sounds cooler. Yeah, whatever floats your boat, right? Here's another example of allomorphy, and that is the prefix con, which means with. Now, this changes form depending on the next letter that comes after it. For a lot of letters, it stays as the N, but in front of M, P, and B, the N changes to an M. And this might sound like a totally arbitrary thing, but if you try pronouncing it, you'll see that it's a very natural change in the articulation, right? So, con-mit, notice how you have to change the place in your mouth where you are pronouncing these things, right? Whereas commit, the M's stay in the same place. Same thing with complacent. The M and the P and the B are all what we call labial constants. And in other words, labial, they're produced on the lips, right? M, B, P, right? All produced by pursing your lips. So what's happening in N, notice if you feel where your tongue touches for N, it's touching on that ridge behind your teeth. That's called the alveolar ridge. And so this is called an alveolar consonant. So what's happening is essentially we are anticipating where the next sound is going to be produced, and we move ahead to it. So commit, complacent, right? But it's still the same prefix, with, right? To commit to something is to go with it, send with it. If you're complacent, you're, peaceful with it. I mean, the etymologies are, correct, you're going with the right thing. That's R is a different one. With R, the N disappears altogether. L does the same thing. In spelling, we double it. We double the spelling. Collect, same idea for it. The other sort of flip side of this, where you can have multiple shapes to one morpheme, you can have the same shape represent different morphemes. In other words, just because you have a string of letters that are pronounced the same doesn't mean that you have the same morpheme, right? So consider, for example, ped meaning child versus ped meaning foot. So pediatrician, pedagogy, those both come from the words meaning child, right? And by the way, Bins, this is not bizarre. This bizarreness is not unique to English. I mean, English has borrowed a lot of words from other languages to an extensive degree, but all of these processes that we're talking about, you can find in any language in the world. These are general, universal, or near universal linguistic processes, right? They're hard to learn for any language, right? But we learn them intuitively when we learn it as kids. So pedal, pedestrian. Obviously, the pedestrian is somebody who travels on foot. Pedal, right? You're using your feet to push something. So, because these meanings are totally different, right? We say that they are, different morphemes, right? Not the same thing. Same thing with the prefix in. The prefix in can either mean not, or it can mean into. So if you're indifferent, you're not different, and it's that you don't care. An influx is a flux or flow into something, right? Immense, that mens root means measurable, measure. So something that's immense is immeasurable, right? And notice By the way, you have the same variation with N that we saw with con. You saw the same allomorphy that happens with in as well, right? N changes to M in front of M. Immigrant is somebody who migrates into a region, right? Something that's illegal, not legal, but illuminate is light into a place. Irresponsible, not responsible. Irradiate, radiation into a place, right? We can definitely have a talk. I think we need to be broader than that, Bins, in terms of what we talk about, but we can definitely talk about usage peeves. Although for could care less, we definitely have to get a significant chunk of grammar under our belts before we can say much about it. There's no T in across. Fair. But some people add it. Adding an extra sound to a word is called a penthesis. And it definitely is a common thing. There are words, I mean, for an example that people do all the time without thinking about it, think about a whole nother situation. Right? Trying not to care, but not doing a good job. Yeah, you're allowed to have a pet peeve about the various things, Kiwi. Just realize that it's a pet peeve, and you probably have your own speech features that irritate other people. So approach with humility. That's my only message. Good question. Arbitrary fact of usage, Bins. Arbitrary fact of usage. I would want to look it up. Right, but yep, car needs washed. Yes, people who are not from Western Pennsylvania and surrounding areas will look askance at you for that one. But if you're from that area, you may not even realize that it's non-standard. So, let me ask, what do you think inflammable means? Yes, Mega. Malaysian and Singaporean English uses on and off as verbs. Teacher's back. Behave again. So it was always inflammable. So, in fact, the Latin root inflammatus means enflamed. You know, like full of flame. The problem is, and in English, so traditionally, the word was borrowed in to mean capable of burning, right? However, there was a problem with this, in that a lot of people look at that word and assume that it means not flammable, right? There is no unflammable, doesn't exist. And essentially, consensus usage by people was that inflammable meant not able to catch on fire. And the issue that they had with this back maybe in the 70s and 80s was that they would put on garment tags or, you know, on the side of a gasoline tanker, you know, inflammable liquid, you know, something like that. And people would think it meant not able, you know, like to catch on fire. And so basically they made a decision, we're just going to start calling these things flammable. So etymologically, like inflammation, yes, perfectly. Yeah. Except nobody uses unflammable, right?